Good morning, folks. As you're joining in, I'm going to give you a soft launch here. I wish you a very happy Easter Monday and happy day after Passover to those of you who are just returning to grounds. And greetings to all of you in the Batten School community. For those of you who do not know us, this is Professor Practice Gerry Warburg speaking to you from Garrett Hall, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Professor Brian N. Williams. Great to have you with us, Brian. Thanks so much. And you'll hear from Brian shortly. Brian's going to lead our Q&A. I want to give a special welcome to students who are enrolled in the Public Policy Challenges of the 21st Century, LPP 3230. There's a reason why Professor Craig Bolden and I asked you students to join this Batten Hour session if you weren't already. And as we get started, I just want to give a brief word to those of you who are new to Batten Hour. This is a time each week that our community sets aside to learn from each other, from one scholar practitioner. In pre-pandemic times, as I said, we used to gather in the Great Hall. You could smell pizza all the way out to the amphitheater. And we hope to have that same community gathering spirit in today's discussion. We'll invite you, as always, to submit questions via the chat function or simply raise your hand. Professor Williams has graciously agreed to curate those questions, and we'll call on you to pose your questions directly to our guest speaker. And we'll run that Q&A right up to a hard stop about 12:20, 12:25. So don't worry, you guys will make the 12:30 classes. Our guest presenter today is a leader from the class of 2021, Mr. Terrell Jana. When Dean Rockwell invites speakers, she looks for individuals whose scholarship and action inspires others to lead. And I would say by any measure, Terrell Jana is a star in that constellation. And his journey from his days as a student in this very class, in LPP 3230, the Challenges class, I think his journey ought to inspire each and every one of you guys enrolled in that class. Terrell came to Virginia from Vancouver, British Columbia, originally to attend Woodbury Forest Prep, where he excelled as both a student and an athlete. Recruited to the University of Virginia, Terrell was determined to use the scholarship to advance his career goals, including but not limited to athletics. He took the big picture public policy questions we address rapidly in this course, week after week, tough issue after tough issue. And well, Terrell went to work. And by the way, he always sat in the front row. That's how we got to know each other. He would pop in early before class started. He would hang out after class, pressing his inquiries. And basically, he kept asking the same question. How can young activists like me make their mark? How can student leaders use our platform to promote a more perfect union? Terrell became a frequent visitor to in-person office hours. He pursued a series of conversations with thought leaders at the Batten School on social justice and racial equity, including our colleagues with us today, Professor Brian Williams and our Dean, Ian Solomon. Terrell's search for reading sources and research on how student athletes can best leverage their position to advocate for public policy challenges. Then last summer, amidst the pandemic and the growing embrace by a diverse community of supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement, Terrell designed and secured approval for a full-year independent study on best practices for student activism in 2020. He also took a number of actions with his teammates, who selected him as a co-captain of our Division I football team, where he served 4 years as a featured wide receiver. Terrell spoke out with local and national media on a number of issues, including UVA's memorial to the enslaved workers who built our grounds. During his subsequent research, Terrell was able to interview some of the nationally recognized activists from UVA athletics, alums of this school, including Jocelyn Witherspoon of the WNBA and Malcolm Brogdon of the Indiana Pacers, and Chris Long, late of the NFL. Today, Terrell will be joining with my colleague, Professor Brian Williams, who will lead the Q&A to share the results of this inquiry. For your work, Terrell, for your dedication, for your leadership, we're deeply grateful. You give voice to the voiceless and add meaning to our work. Please join me in welcoming back to the Batten Hour, class of 2021's Terrell Jana. Great to have you, Terrell.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I'm grateful and honored to be here today, and I'm going to just hop right into our presentation. So here we go. Perfect. So again, so as Professor Warburg kind of mentioned, this is a project I'm working on for the past year now. And again, I'm just so thankful to be here today to present to you the work I've been working on for, a year and a half of my life now. And there are kind of three takeaways that I would like to everybody here today to kind of take away from the presentation. And the first one is that when it comes to athlete activism, there is a level of next step of activism that I believe is kind of some untapped potential. There's a level of activism that I believe athletes can take next that can have a greater impact in our communities. Number two, this is happening now. Although this is untapped potential, there are some athletes and some advocates doing this work. I think we need to recognize that and celebrate that. And lastly, I'll present to you a model that I created through some review of literature and as well as some interviews I did that athletes can follow to best participate in the policy-making process. So real quick, just about me, even though y'all heard a little about me, I'm Terrell Jana from Vancouver, British Columbia, the Batten undergrad program here. And as Professor Warburg said, I've been on the football team for the past 4 years. So where are we now? Moving forward from the past kind of 20, 30 years of athlete activism, there's been, I think in the past 5 years, two great shifts and two great impactful moments in athlete activism that we've seen. And the first one, I believe, was Colin Kaepernick taking a knee in 2016, which kind of reimagined what athlete activism in the public eye looked like and what disruptive activism was for athletes and activists. And also in 2020, as we all know, changed the shift in athlete activism and the climate of activism greatly within the past year. And we see not only athletes having symbolic measures like we see here, but also targeting policy. And this came on the eve of the tragic deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, the shooting of Jacob Blake, as well as the tragic killing of Ahmaud Arbery. But we see the shift from symbolic protests like here in '68 Olympics with Tommy Smith and John Carlos. And this is today, this is 2017 with Chris Long, UVA grad Chris Long, and UVA grad Ronnie McLeod, flanking Malcolm Jenkins in the middle here while they were showing a form of protest during the playing of the national anthem. But what we're seeing now is this shift into not only symbolic protests, but also what are some actionable items we can take as athletes to participate in the policymaking process and provide solutions to these issues that we're protesting. And this is Malcolm Jenkins, who's in the middle over here to the left, sitting down with Anquan Bolton, who are co-founders of a group who focus on policy through athletics. And this is them at a congressional forum on police and community relations. So how we got here? So when I look at athlete activism and through my research, I realized that there's been a general 4 different categories of activism, and it's been shifting throughout the years. So we start in the early 20th century when you have what I call breaking barriers. And breaking barriers really is just athletes who, through their own personal success, represent achievement for a bigger group of people. So we see this with Jack Johnson, who in 1908 became the first African-American heavyweight champion after beating the Great White Hope in a boxing championship. And then Gertrude Ederle in 1926 became the first woman to swim the entire English Channel, breaking many records for both men and women. Well, she was the first woman, but both the men records as well. And their personal achievement meant more to the collective view of their groups that they're represented in American society. Next, we have activism. I'm gonna just go through a couple of these, but if you see a name, you're interested in looking to them because all these people are pretty special. Next is activism. And activism is more than just personal achievement, but you're also representing a personal cause that means something to you. So we go in '67, Bill Russell was part of the Cleveland Summit, where a collection of Black athletes came together in support for Muhammad Ali and his protest of being drafted. And then we also have Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who we saw in the picture before, as well as Toni Smith. And Toni Smith in 2003, she was a college basketball player who decided to protest the national anthem and turn her back to the American flag during the playing of the national anthem. And her reasoning was because she believed that the flag and the anthem did not represent people like her at that time or in history. And we go down to advocacy. And advocacy is like activism, but the difference is advocacy is choosing a specific policy area or supporting a specific policy figure, politician, district attorney, whoever it may be. So in '58, Jackie Robinson was a part of, was an honorary chairman of the Youth March for Integrated Schools with Dr. King. So again, the difference between activism is Jackie Robinson and Dr. King were focusing on integrated schools, a specific policy, rather than kind of a general kind of call for racial inclusion. In 1974, we have Bill Walton, who was arrested for protesting the Vietnam War while he was at UCLA. And then in 2004, Curt Schilling, after winning the World Series, went on to endorse George W. Bush right after he won the World Series, and kind of went on a little campaign supporting George W. Bush. So again, this is different than activism because they are actively choosing a singular person and or policy area to target. And lastly, we have action. And with action, the difference is instead of just supporting or bringing awareness to a policy area or to a figure, they're actually seeking solutions to these problems. So again, all these names are pretty important people, so check them out. But Chris Long, a 2018 UVA grad, he hosted a town hall in Arlington, Virginia, where he had two district attorney candidates for Fairfax and Arlington County. And in that town hall, they discussed policy, a variety of different policy areas, trying to educate voters on their stances, as well as Maya Moore. And if you don't know who Maya Moore is, she's a WNBA player, and I highly recommend you look into the work she's doing. For the past 3 years now, she has 4 winter seasons, and not at the tail end of her career, but in the prime of her career, she has 4 winter seasons to focus on criminal justice reform. And that would be advocacy. However, she has, with a team, helped free a man who was wrongfully convicted of a crime when he was 16 years old and spent 23 years in maximum security prison. And she was part of that team that helped free him back in 2020. So the opportunity. So moving forward, we see this shift in activism from symbolism to actual policy, kind of direct engagement, and these athletes engaging with policymakers directly. And why is this important? This is important because I like to compare it to, imagine if Dr. King only gave sermons. So there was no marches, there was no protests, no arrests, but he was only known for his sermons. And that wouldn't be as powerful. And similarly to these athletes, although they are saying the right things, the next step is to do the right things and to seek solutions. And luckily, I had the pleasure of speaking with UVA grad Chris Long, and I asked him to speak on the impact athletes have had in policy and why this form of activism is so powerful.
And on that note, I think this work is so powerful because we're able to harness the attention that people give to us and divert that to issues that are negatively impacting society. Then, because we are a democracy, once people are paying attention to an issue, our collective voice and the pressure that our voice might enhance pushes those in positions of power to better serve their constituents. So that's the game, right? And we've seen grassroots groups work for months to even just get a meeting with an elected official. And when we came in, right or wrong, those meetings were set within a few weeks. So we know the platform we have, and we try to take advantage of it. Ultimately, athlete activism, and again, I say athlete activism because I would scarcely count myself an actual activist, is very powerful because it forces accountability and accelerates that change that we're looking for.
And furthermore, again, I had the pleasure to speak with also Batten graduate Jocelyn Willoughby, and I asked her if she could speak on this new era of athlete activism and the potential impact that athletes can have in the policy arena moving forward. And this is what she told me.
So speaking to the growth and evolution of athlete activism, there are a couple of things. One, speaking out and being an activist is no longer a taboo thing. Today, I feel like it's more expected, encouraged, and we see athletes as almost having a responsibility to use their platform. The other thing is that we're in a period where we see athletes and encourage them to be more than an athlete. In terms of the potential athletes can have in impacting policy moving forward, I think the biggest thing I've learned is that athletes are huge influencers in our culture and our society today. And there's a huge potential for them to be thought leaders, influencing how, what people are talking about, what they view as being issues in our society. And so, a huge potential and I think opportunity for athletes moving forward as we think about policy is driving conversations, educating the masses, being the ones to spearhead public education campaigns, creating that dialogue and ultimately endorsing certain policies either as individuals, as teams, or organizations and leagues.
So I asked myself after speaking with some of with Jocelyn and Chris Long, and I asked how can we best harness our influence as athletes to have the greatest impact possible moving forward. And I thought the best way to do this was to create a model which athletes can follow if they want to participate in policy. And how I did this was first just to review contemporary literature. And unfortunately, this field or subject of athletes participating in policy doesn't really exist. So I had to kind of get creative and find articles that work on athlete activism and how they're using their platforms and their influence and the nexus of that, as well as advocacy and activism in policy from grassroots individuals and organizations. Secondly, I conducted interviews with current and former professional athletes who are also activists and advocates in their field, as well as an expert in the field of policy and advocacy. And lastly, I did a case study, which I'll get to later on. And the interviews I conducted, I was lucky enough to speak with some UVA grads and some pretty amazing people. First, you already heard from Chris Long, former NFL player. He's a member of the Players Coalition board, which I'll get to again in the case study. We heard from Jocelyn Willoughby, NBA player, a master's in public policy, Batten grad, as well as Malcolm Brogdon, Batten grad as well, current NBA player, as well as has numerous foundations, including Hoops 2.0. And spoke with Tiki Barber, NFL running back and UVA grad, as well. Down in the middle here, this is Von Bryant, who was an NFL player, and now he's executive director at a nonprofit. And lastly, with an expert in policy and advocacy who asked to remain anonymous. So here's what I found. So here's some of the highlights that I got from my interviews and from reviewing contemporary literature. And what a lot of people kind of spoke to, I kind of try to condense in some key kind of aspects here. So first one, authenticity is key. It's important to be authentic if you're going to participate in this space. Secondly, you have to be credible. You have to know what you're talking about. And if you don't, it can undermine whatever you're saying. It can undermine that whole movement, undermine the people who are already doing the work. Third, you have to start small, have manageable goals and things you can achieve. One of my interviewees said, you have to crawl before you can walk. Fourth, know your network. Understand, as athletes, like Chris Long said, right or wrong, we have vast networks and have access to people that normal groups don't have. So understand that network and try to make the most out of it. And lastly, the power of partnership. Partnering with content experts is a huge aspect of this. Be a megaphone and amplify those who are already doing the work, who have been doing the work for years. So the model that I came up with is here. So the first step is seeking your passion. Again, this model is for influencing policy. How can athletes best participate in the policymaking process? So the first step is seek your passion. And again, I kind of put some points here. So what is your purpose? Find your identity, and authenticity is key. So when it comes to finding your passion and finding your purpose, Expert One and Jocelyn mentioned both about finding your identity. Before you can help others, you have to understand what you're passionate about. Von Bryant spoke to this as well, saying that it can be re-traumatizing for a community or a group of people if what you're doing is not truly authentic, if your intent isn't truly authentic and can re-traumatize a community. Again, if you're trying to almost parachute in and then parachute out when your season's over or something like that. And lastly, Chris Long mentioned that it's hard to do both. It's hard to have a career in sports. It's hard to be an advocate and be in this field at the same time. So if you're going to do it, you have to do something you're passionate about and you truly have a heart for. Second is seeking knowledge. So first, you have to know what you're talking about. As mentioned, you have to be credible. If you're not knowledgeable on the topic you're speaking on, it can again undermine the message or undermine whatever you're trying to get across because you haven't done enough research to support your opinions. Tiki Barber mentioned to me, he said, if you're not credible, that it sends the wrong message even when you're trying to do the right thing. And supporting that is that the media can be very unforgiving. As Jocelyn told me this, Jocelyn Willoughby, she said, the media is very unforgiving to those with large platforms. So if you're going to speak on these issues, you need to come correct. And lastly, understand the issue and connect with stakeholders on a deep level. Both Malcolm Brogdon and Jocelyn Willoughby spoke to this and spoke to staying connected to communities on a deep level. It's not enough to just know a problem. We have to understand the issue, understand its history and its stakeholders in this that are included in this community or in that problem. And Ronald Heifetz, who's the kind of founder director of the Center of Public Leadership at the Kennedy School of Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, in his book, Leadership Without Easy Answers, he spoke on the power of informal and formal authority and how those two authorities kind of work in leadership positions. And he said a disadvantage of formal authority is distance from raw and relevant detail. And that's the best thing about athletes. Athletes in this space have an informal authority. So you have the ability to connect to these communities, connect to these stakeholders on a deep level. And for a lot of cases, these athletes come from these communities and they have family in these communities. So the deeper connection to these communities and these problems that people in formal authority roles, like like politicians, elected officials, do not have. Step 3 is to seek resources. Again, I talked about earlier, there's vast networks when it comes to athletes and the coaches, the GMs, the owners, league officials. There's a vast network of people and resources you can connect to, so use those to your advantage. Partner with content experts. Again, there's people already doing the work. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. So if you're trying to engage in these policy topics and policy areas, you don't have to create from nothing. There's people doing the work already. Be a megaphone, amplify their voice and what they're doing. And lastly, is seek action. This is the last step. Start small though. Start small, have achievable goals. There's no reason when you're first stepping into this field and you're trying to change our national defense policy of America. Start small, start with some policy areas that you can achieve. You can speak with stakeholders. You can speak with local officials and get things done in your community. Again, understand your platform. There's a variety of action items, but also a variety of levels of engagement. Let's say there is an election coming up in your community and you want to just tweet out, hey, there's an election coming out, make sure you go vote, here are the days to go vote. That's one level of engagement. Another level of engagement might be, I'm going to bring in these two candidates and host a town hall like Chris Long did early in Arlington, Virginia, to talk about their stances. Another level of engagement you can get to. And I just put here, of course, there's just to emphasize, there's a variety of different things you can do with different levels of engagement to get things that you want to get done. So now this is just a case study on the group I was speaking about earlier, the Players Coalition. They were founded in 2017 by Malcolm Jenkins, and who's a current NFL player, and Anquan Bolton, who's a former NFL player. It's made of 2 affiliated groups, a charity and an advocacy group, a 501c3 and 501c4. And their key pillars are police community relations, criminal justice reform, education, and economic advancement. And they're made of a task force board of 11 voting members, but they also have ambassadors in 10 different leagues. And here are some of the leagues that they're involved in and players part of the group. And this is from the website that their group and its members have a collective goal of making an impact on social justice and racial equality at the federal, state, and local levels. So just kind of, here's a quick impact of the work they've done. This is from their impact report from 2020. I think this is going back until 2017. This is the first impact report. As you can see, 12 bills passed, 2 critical school board votes. And in this picture below, this is from left to right, this is Daron Harmon, Devin McCourty, and Jason McCourty, 3 current NFL players for New England Patriots, 3 DBs. And this is them speaking at the Massachusetts State House, supporting a bill called the Education Promise Act. And after this, after they spoke to the legislators, they took all 15 of them to a visit to a local high school, again, just to kind of emphasize their support for a bill. this is Anquan Bolton. This was the co-founder of the group, and he was a part of the coalition that helped pass Amendment 4 in Florida, which restored the voting rights to 1.4 million Floridians. And Howard Simon, the executive director at ACLU in Florida, said, "I do think Amendment 4 is going to transform Florida forever." We keep going here again. So this is more recent. This was March 25th. The coalition, which is kind of highlighting they watch policy in 20 different states right now. So this is their lobbying supporting this bill, which helped restore the rights to 20,000 Washingtonians. And even more recently, they're kind of supporting and tracking some legislation in Maryland, which would end juvenile life without parole. And this passed the Senate in March 23rd, but just this past Saturday, it passed the House as well, and it's on to the governor. So just kind of viewing their work through the model here, and how it can kind of translate. So step one, again, this is more a personal journey for each person, but seeking your passion. And luckily enough, since they're co-founders, we can hear the story a little bit. And Anquan Bolton on the right here, he in 2016, after a game, his wife came up to him and told him that his cousin had been shot and killed by a police officer. And his cousin was on the phone, his car broke down. He was on the phone with roadside assistance when a police officer in plainclothes came up. An altercation ensued, and the officer ended up shooting and killing his cousin, Corey Jones. After this happened, Bolton retired from the NFL and focused his entire attention on this group, and pushing more progressive laws for criminal justice reform. And Malcolm Jenkins on the left, he kind of gave credit to his parents and said he saw what his parents were able to do for children in his community, and see how much help they could provide. And then when he created his foundation, the Malcolm Jenkins Foundation, although they were doing a lot of good work, he realized that he was helping these kids by sending them back into environments that sent them to him in the first place. So he realized, started real quick. This is Anquan Bolton. With the platform I have, I felt it was more than right to speak about these issues, but to also try to come up with solutions. This is Anquan Bolton speaking here. And then Malcolm Jenkins, he's kind of spoken again with his foundation. He said philanthropy is needed, but doesn't fix the problem. So step two, seek knowledge. This is pretty straightforward. This is from the website. So it says the members and the group invest personal time and resources to educate themselves on various issues affecting their communities. And Malcolm Jenkins, again, co-founder, goes on to say how this is one of the first goals that he and Anquan Bolton kind of came up when trying to start the group. How do we educate guys so they feel knowledgeable enough and have resources to speak on these issues? So like I mentioned, seeking knowledge is the next step. You have to understand these issues on a deep level and become knowledgeable to speak on them, and be credible in this space. And third, so seek resources. So again, they're NFL players. So one of their first deals they made is with the NFL. They signed a 7-year, $89 million deal with the NFL to fund projects focusing on criminal justice reform, law enforcement, community relations, and education. And what Jenkins and Bolton realized is that a lot of the guys have foundations. So I had these organizations doing work, but they were doing them in silos. And he said, we can get a lot more done working together. And that's exactly what happened. Here are some groups that are affiliated with Press Coalition that have kind of, the coalition has gave birth to these groups right here. The USL, this is the WNBA, this is MLS, and of course, Lacrosse Alliance right here. And furthermore, so again, this is kind of partnering with content experts and being a megaphone. This is a National Juvenile Defender Center who gave thanks to the coalition for support on a report they gave out. And this is the African American Policy Forum, which had a week-long project called Her Dream Deferred. And as you can see in this kind of bottom part of this tweet, DeMario Davis, he is a member of the Press Coalition and a player on the New Orleans Saints. And the Press Coalition co-hosted this event that they've had. And lastly, the website itself, the coalition on the website has resources for players and teams. If they want to go on the website, they can get resources for grassroots organizations directory. They have a voting toolkit and a voting dictionary you can have to educate yourself and others on voting. There's more educational material, and they also have a kind of little button you can press, you can put in your zip code, and you can locate the senators and representatives that represent you. And lastly, seeking action. And I spoke a little bit this already, but I'm gonna go through real quick again. $9.2 million in grants. This is through their charity to fund local grassroots organizations. They held over 148 public events. They've written 108 op-eds or letters to elected officials, and more recently and notably, they wrote a letter to Congress supporting the End Qualified Immunity Act, which amassed 1,400 signatures. And this came out this past week, actually. New Orleans Saints captains, Demario Davis, like I mentioned before, he's one of them, and Malcolm Jenkins as well. They put out an article which addressed legislation across the country, including no-knock warrants and the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. And they called out 6 states with legislators considering anti-protest legislation. They also talked about the Crisis Act in California, which funds non-law enforcement first responders, and spoke on the restructuring of police union contracts in Philadelphia. And here is another event coming up. This is happening on Wednesday coming up, actually. Malcolm Jenkins, again, co-founder, and Tasha Cloud, WNBA player, are co-hosting an event on the civilian oversight of police stations in Philadelphia. So where do we go from here? This is a quote from Doug Hartman's article on activism, organizing, and symbolic power of sport. And what he said was, what is missing from the contemporary scene is a climate and infrastructure conducive to activism for athletes, an infrastructure and social network that would provide athletes a realistic opportunity for having an impact. And the good thing about this is that this quote from Malcolm Jenkins, he says, the Pledge Coalition is that resource to empower athletes with the information and the infrastructure behind them to make an impact. So it kind of solves that first part, the infrastructure and social network that is missing. This group and other groups like it, they're filling that void. The next question is has the climate changed to also kind of support an environment that's healthy for athlete activism? And I believe the answer is yes. We've seen this in 2020 with both pro and collegiate athletes and organizations taking a large leap forward when it comes to activism and the support of leagues and officials in their players' activism. We see this in baseball, the MLB. Most recently, they pulled the All-Star game from Georgia in response to some of the recent voter laws that were being considered and passed in the state. And when I spoke with Jocelyn, Jocelyn Willoughby, she went on to tell me that there's less of a division between athletes and organizations. You see organizations being more supportive of their athletes, which indicates a change in climate. I think that's a perfect answer to this question, if the climate has changed. It is changing. It's not where it needs to be, but it's getting there. And I believe that this missing pieces in the contemporary scene of climate and infrastructure is finally being addressed. But lastly, what I do believe is there needs to be an increase of academia in this field when it comes to athletes participating in public policy. Of course, there are articles, and there's more articles kind of coming out on the growing athlete activism, where athletes are finding the voice even more, how athletes are speaking out on more issues. However, there's a lack of empirical data kind of showing the efficacy of how these athlete-led groups actually have effect on policy. And I believe that if we get this, we can have a better grasp and figure out the best way to create and support the infrastructures needed to allow athletes and advocates to have the greatest impact possible. So some key takeaways, as I mentioned before. First, there is untapped potential. There is another level of activism that athletes can take to better their own communities and better our own communities. Again, I go back to Dr. King. Imagine if he only gave sermons, the impact wouldn't be the same. And two, this is happening right now. I think although this is seemingly untapped potential, I think this is not a foreign concept. It's not something that I just kind of made up. This is currently happening, and I think we need to acknowledge, recognize, and celebrate the athletes who are taking this step and encourage others to do so as well. And lastly, just again, the 4-step model that I spoke about: seeking your passion, seeking knowledge, seeking resources, and then seeking action. When it comes to a guiding roadmap for athletes and really anybody who wants to take a step into participating in policy, that's a great way to start. And Thank you very much. I said in the presentation. So I think now I'm going to pass it to Professor Brian Williams for the Q&A.
Thank you so very much, Terrell, and thanks to each of you for zooming in and participating on this presentation. Good afternoon, I'm Brian Williams, and what I'd like to do is go directly to the first question that was posted at 11:49. John, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and asking that question. Well, John, I'm not sure if you can hear me or not, so I'll read the question for you. He wrote, I assume there's a diversity of opinions about social issues and social activism within an individual athletic team. Terrell, can you speak to how these differences are managed among teammates and how, if these conversations among teammates can be a model for discourse in the general public?
Yeah, I feel like sports is a special place. I think anybody who's kind of been in a locker room or a team, their environment is pretty unique because it brings people from different environments into this one collective goal that is really completely arbitrary. I mean, in my case, it was football. So we're trying to win football games, which in the light of the real world doesn't really mean anything. However, it's a collective goal. And we have people from Texas, I mean, I'm from Canada, people from Germany, all on the same team trying to do this goal. So it connects them on a pretty deep level, which now when you address these topics, which can be a little more controversial, it allows a fundamental respect, understanding, and kind of community that I think can embrace these difficult conversations in a way that's kind of unique to public discourse. So I think in a way to kind of translate to the public, I feel like a great first step in having these difficult conversations is recognizing humanity within everybody. You know, again, this collective goal is we as a society we're trying to be happy, we're trying to move forward, we're trying to get these things done. How can we do so in a manner that's productive, efficient for all of us, that respects everybody? That's where we can have these difficult conversations with this fundamental understanding that, you know, we're human beings, we're flawed, and we're trying to get things done. I think, again, the special thing about locker room and idea of sports is that we have that initial connection, that initial kind of relationship that a lot of people don't get. So I think the first step maybe in this kind of general public discourse is trying to get to that first step, get that relationship, understand the person you're talking with on a deeper level before you discuss these kind of difficult conversations.
Thank you so much, Terrell. Tristan, if you wouldn't mind asking your question.
Yeah, so for the lesser known athletes and former athletes without platforms, what's your advice for becoming an advocate for the change? Should they utilize their network of athletes that have the platform and then work together? I know you talked about crawling before walking. Should they set up their own plan and then see where it goes, or just some other tactic? I'm really asking because a lot of the guys you talked about, Anquan Boldin, Malcolm Jenkins, those are big name NFL guys. We're just thinking about, I don't know, like high school, college guys that don't have the large following, large platform.
Yeah, I think a great first step, I mentioned this like in the presentation a little bit, like you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know, I think that there are people doing this work. There are people in the community, grassroots organizations doing this work. So I think a great first step, if you're trying to participate in this kind of field, is seek those in your community, the local organizations who are doing the work already, and just kind of learn from them, piggyback off what they're doing. And they have it down pat already, you know what I'm saying? So like, I think just work with them as a great initial first step, because yeah, of course, this is kind of a selected kind of group of people who can work in using the platform with a large group of people. So I would say start local, start small, start with people in your kind of sphere of influence.
Gotcha. Thanks, Terrell. Awesome presentation.
Thanks, man.
Natalie just posted something in chat. Natalie, if you wouldn't mind sharing what you posted.
Sure. I was just saying thank you to Terrell for sharing the resources that he did today, because I think that a lot of times, unless you're involved directly with the sports, with those organizations, with those speakers. You don't really know it exists. So I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to be able to take the information you provided, go forth and kind of educate ourselves on that. And with that being said, I think what's really key is that every small step makes ripple effects. So sharing that information, you'd be surprised how many people you're actually touching with that. So just want to.
Thank you, Natalie. And I'd like for you guys to continue to post questions in chat. Terrell, I have a question as I'm awaiting additional questions. With rights come responsibilities, but with these responsibilities, there may be some consequences. Did you get a sense from your research on how they navigated the minefields and balanced the trade-offs with them willing to engage in the activity that they did?
Definitely. I think when it comes to kind of just navigating those minefields, the first step is you have to have a passion for it. It's a difficult space to navigate, and it's not if you're doing it just for show. As I think Von Bryant's piece spoke this a little bit, he said it could be a detriment to not only what you're trying to get across, but also the people who are doing the work. If you're not authentic in your intent to try and navigate this field, because it's, as anybody knows who's trying to navigate, I guess that field of policy, it can be very difficult. And if you're trying to do so while also having a profession that's outside of it, while also having a family and a social life, it's nearly impossible. So if you're not passionate about these things, if your heart's not in it, then it can be hard to do that. So I think the first step, again, is finding out what you're truly passionate about. And to do that, I think you need to find your own identity first.
Thank you. Aiden, please unmute and ask your question.
Thanks again, Terrell. It's been an enjoyable presentation. This question's kind of threefold. First, I was curious how you found the change that you're seeking to achieve. How important having an athlete or someone of authority is in backing a movement, and can that change occur if there is no athlete present? Secondly, how important is the popularity of that athlete? Do they have to be big name? And if they are not big name, what are steps that they can take in order to still achieve that same progress as a big name athlete would pull? And then lastly, what type of struggles have you ran into in your research, and how has overcoming those struggles played a part in the outcome of your research?
I'm gonna start with the last part first. So yeah, the struggles I found was that there's no literature on athletes participating in public policy. There are some with athletes in sports policy, and the idea of athletes in general using their voice for activism and advocacy of some sort, but actually participating in policy and public policy, there was no literature. So I kind of had to find literature within, again, I said, athlete activism as well as advocacy and activism in general, and connect those two and find a nexus between them to try and create my model, which was then supportive with the interviews I had and the case study I did. That's the first part. Give me one more part of that question, sorry.
The importance of the popularity of the athlete and whether change can occur without having an athlete involved.
Yeah, I think it can. Well, 100% it can be done. Athletes don't need to be present. All we're doing is, again, being that megaphone and supporting the people who are already doing the work. There are professionals who do this. You know, athletes are not professional policymakers or activists. It's like this is something that is happening kind of on the side. And I think Chris Long mentioned this in the video at the start of the presentation, is that we get attention, right or wrong, we get attention from policymakers and the media. And if we do our best possible way to redirect that energy to people who are doing important work, that's the most important thing. So there's no need for athletes to be involved, but they are involved, they can help a lot, which I think is important. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Terrell. Charles, your hand is up. Please ask your question.
Hey, Terrell, I just want to start off saying I'm a huge fan of your work on and off the field, so I really appreciate you doing this. Great presentation. I just had a quick question. So to people that say, I'm not going to watch the NBA because it's too political, they're making too many points, keep politics out of sports, what would you say to those people? And if someone were to be an athlete in that position, what would you want them to say back to those people? Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Charles. It's something that, especially in America and in the world in general, sports is so closely tied to society and to our culture as a whole. It's nearly impossible to separate sports from our culture and from our society. So it's saying I don't want politics in sports, but politics is inevitably going to be in sports. It's going to be in the fabric of who we are as a country, who we are as kind of as a nation, and the world in general. So for somebody might be able to watch a game and think, this is just football, this is just volleyball, this is just soccer. But for a great majority, especially the people playing that sport, everything they do in their life is tied into a lot of these policies that affect us. I mean, a lot of these players, especially in NFL, the ones I kind of spoke to, they come from communities that were underserved. They come from communities that are struggling. And I spoke about this in my paper a little bit, but there's this dilemma for kind of the athlete to almost step away from the communities and immediately step from, in some cases, from poverty to being a millionaire overnight. And with that change, it's inevitable. You're going to see a lot of these things that affect your community. So what I say to them, you can believe that all you want, but it's going to be hard to convince a lot of people, especially the athletes, to take that stance and to remove themselves and their humanity from a game or from their life. And for an athlete who's asked that question, it's your life. I mean, they don't have to watch you, they don't have to watch the NBA if they don't want to, but again, it's your platform. It's your voice. Use it as you want. I think, again, if you're sincere and you're authentic in your intent, then no matter what anybody says, I think you're going to find people who support you. And if you can support yourself in that way, that's all that matters.
Gerry, do you mind asking your question?
I'd love to follow up on Mr. Snowden's question. Terrell, I just wanted to try to draw you out a little bit personally on your journey from sitting in a classroom talking about public policy, and I know we throw a lot of issues at you quickly, to taking action. You took a symbolic action which attracted a lot of media and national attention this year as a tribute to the enslaved workers who built our homes and our grounds here. And if you could just walk us through personally how you came from being the kid sitting in the front row trying to take notes so you can pass the final, to finding a calling to do this research and with Charles and others to take action in your community during really fraught 18 months we've had here, or 3 years we've had as a community, been very tense. But tell us a little bit more personally about how that evolved and whether you were prepared for the media inquiries and interests that came at you for your symbolic action and wearing a no-name jersey.
Yeah, the journey was a long one and complicated one, but I do believe that I'm lucky enough to have a support staff around me when it comes to my community, with my teammates, my coaches, my dear friends, and my family, that put me in a position where I'm able to kind of navigate these difficult kind of topics and conversations in a way that's clear and understandable for me. And yeah, it really just, it's been my whole kind of high school and early college career was just taking things in, again, I think almost step one of my model, like just finding out who I was, finding my own identity, and where I stood in kind of this huge movement that was kind of happening in the past kind of 2-3 years here in Charlottesville and in America in general. And what I realized when I visited the memorial for enslaved workers here at UVA, it touched me how there was no last names. If there was last names, it was the last names given to those workers by the slave owners. And the idea of a last name was so powerful for me and my family. It represents and the story it tells. And to think that someone's story and culture was taken from them affected me greatly. And it just opened up. So I just thought, okay, here's a way I can shine light on this memorial and hopefully bring some attention to it. So for me, again, it was trying to be a megaphone. How can I, best visually be someone that can draw eyes from me to something else, like some of the people I spoke with mentioned. And again, no matter what, you're wearing the V Sabres, a lot of the student athletes in this, well, everyone in this call knows, represents Thomas Jefferson represents kind of the history and tradition of UVA. And I thought, but not wearing the name on my back of my jersey, that would also represent the people who are kind of going unnoticed. It was an amazing opportunity for me. I actually met a woman in the Villa, for those who know, down on the Villa, and she kind of spoke. She was a direct descendant of an enslaved worker here in UVA, and just that conversation I had with her was more than enough, and more of kind of reciprocation for doing it, because her showing her gratitude and me being able to kind of talk and have a conversation with her was pretty amazing. So again, I think I'm grateful just for the community, the UVA community, the Batten community, everyone I've been around that kind of just put me in a place where I could take these steps in a comfortable space and be confident enough in myself and people around me to be comfortable in doing it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks, Terrell. Joe, you have a question, if you would unmute, please.
Yes, sir. First off, Terrell, thank you for giving that presentation and choosing that topic. But my question first was, should athletes become more established informal actors, whether that means participating in lobbying, campaign funding, helping get political actors reelected? We see constantly business owners and CEOs shaping the policymaking process, and professional athletes and these business owners have the same amount of money. So like, should athletes become more engaged as established informal actors in the policymaking process? And if you could kind of shine some light on that question.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. That was a great question. That's something that came up in a conversation I had with Chris Long, and he mentioned just the idea that athletes bring in this transparency in the process of policy. When you're having these conversations that usually happen behind closed doors, like you mentioned, with different actors that we don't see, our public don't see, athletes have the ability to bring that to the public light when they have these conversations and kind of bring it towards the people and allow for transparency in the process, which is almost the opposite of kind of what you're hinting at, is that closed door politics that we don't really see. So I think an important aspect of that is that, I think absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you can't become that same closed door kind of actor. So it has to be somewhat informal authority, which is a tough kind of thing to navigate. Yes, you should engage with policymakers, you should engage in the process, but keeping it transparent, keep it in the public, I think is a very important key to as athletes, because the minute you become too involved and it's too formal, and then it gets kind of stuck in that gridlock of political kind of, when it comes too political and behind closed doors, it can kind of, I think, undermine the trust that people have in athletes and as representatives for them, and can kind of make it murky what they're trying to do. So I do think a key aspect of that is keeping the informal authority that I mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Terrell, and thanks for that question, Joe. We have one final question before we do a hard stop, but we will hang around a little longer to address some of the other questions for those who are willing to and able to stay. And that question comes from Cardi. Cardi is unable to unmute, so I'll read the question that was posted. Much of the presentation focused on our professional athletes, and I wonder if you have any ideas to get athletes interested in activism, advocacy, and action earlier, high school or collegiate levels, in their own communities. There's so much to do in many places where their help could be used. Your response, Terrell.
Yes, I do think, I think the initial first step, and what took me a good couple of years, is to have the understanding of who you are and that maturity before you kind of take that step into this kind of area. And I think it can be a little unrealistic to expect our high school athletes, or even our 17, 18-year-old college athletes, to be the ones leading in this kind of space. I think this is time for growth and maturity. But if they are ready, which a lot of people are, I know I wasn't, but some people were, some people are, that, again, just use your platform, be a part of the conversation, especially in America, people love sports. So if you have that attention on you and you can redirect it to people who are doing the work already, that is a great first step. And as college athletes as well, you've seen it in 2020, this past year, the amount of athletes who have kind of taken a stand, especially in the Pac-12, who postpone their start of their season due to protests. We have a platform, it can be used, it can be leveraged. And within college and in high school, it needs to be collective. It can't be that personal, because again, at this point, our platforms aren't big enough individually, but as a team or as a community, it can be pretty big. So yes, there are some things in this presentation that highlight, professional athletes and the platforms they have, but a lot of the same kind of ideas and concepts can be translated through the college and high school kind of ranks.
Thank you,
That
Terrell.
concludes, I believe, Brian, if I might just wrap for a moment here, that concludes the hour that we have here. We've got some wonderful questions queued up. Dean Solomon's just added a very thoughtful question. Christine, Wayne, I see your hands up as well. What we would like to do out of respect for your schedule, since a lot of folks have a 12:30 class, is wrap the program now, but then remain here. We call it a hangout, and we do it in the challenges class all the time. We're going to hang out here for a few more minutes so you all can get more questions to Terrell. I wanted, in wrapping the show, to single out a few people who've really been instrumental in making this happen. First of all, I misspoke earlier. Jocelyn Willoughby has been great in supporting this work, and I wanted to give a shout out to Jocelyn, Malcolm Brogdon, Chris Long, and others. Professor Brian Williams has really been the godfather of this project and given an enormous amount of guidance to Terrell and to me as we've shaped the curriculum for this program. We've had the support of the athletics department. I thank our director, Carla Williams, I see on the show. I thank some of the players like Charles Snowden. I thank you for being leaders and leading our community in so many ways in fraught times. It's just meant a lot to all of us, no matter what our perspective, to see you guys out there giving voice to your passion and speaking to some of our concerns as community leaders. Thank you for joining us for Batten Hour. Thank you, Terrell and Brian Williams. This has been a really informative show and we really appreciate it. We're going to stop now, but we will continue here on this same channel for a few minutes so you can get more questions in. Thank you all for being here and have a great Monday. And we're now in the after show. Brian, I'm going to hand it back to you. Sorry to speak over you there. I want to make sure we wrapped, but I'm going to let you curate these questions. I saw a zinger from Dean Solomon. I'm tempted to throw that one up to you first, Terrell. We've got Ian on the line here as well. And let's get to Wayne and Christine.
Yep, Dean Solomon, would you like to unmute or would you like for me to read?
I don't want to jump in front of Christina and Wayne. I'll wait my turn. Thanks, though.
That will work. Christine, followed by Wayne.
Hi, Terrell, good friend, great classmate, awesome presentation. My question is for anyone looking to get into sports administration or sports management, what can the professional team these players are working for do to help? What in-house infrastructures have worked? Or do you think activism is more suited for the more nonprofit third-party groups like the Players Coalition? Just looking for your thoughts on that.
That was a great question. I do believe, again, I think in the power of partnership. So you see organizations or teams working with their players. We saw what the NFL did with the Players Coalition, but what they did in that was create a fund within every single team. And each team would match those donations that every player made up to $250,000. So it could be up to $500,000 for each team to work locally in their communities, which I think is a kind of a great little project. And we see more now where leagues, NASCAR, even NASCAR, MLB supporting its players a little more. But there hasn't been that next step. I think the same with it kind of NFL or NBA or WNBA has been a leader in the space as well, has taken. So as of right now, I think it can be onto the players, and because again, I think to reinvent the wheel, there's groups, plenty of groups doing this work already. So all we really need to do is be a megaphone for those groups and support them and support the work they're already doing, because they have the groundwork already.
Yes, it's my turn to ask a question now. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So huge fan of Terrell. He already knows that. I'm at the spot where I usually meet him every week in the training room. But something Terrell and I have in common is that we're both international students. And what that does, we might not have a full understanding of the social context in the US because we're not from this country. So my question to you, Terrell, is when you just came here, knowing that you had a passion for, advocacy and activism, who did you turn to, or where did you turn to get credible information as you presented earlier? Who did you turn to for knowledge? so you could like have a better understanding of who you are, your identity, and like what you wanted to do going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question, Wayne. Thank you. I first came here, man, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, a long time. But when I first came here, he was on his call earlier. I don't know if he still is, but Joe Stevenson who asked that question, man. He was a dear friend of mine in high school. Hey, Joe. And we had some great conversations at our high school. And really, I think, again, a great first step is just having conversations with your peers and your sphere of influence. And many nights we stayed up talking about a variety of different topics. And it helps kind of, it's like kind of iron sharpens iron. We're finding out who we are, we're challenging each other, we're seeking knowledge again. So for the past 5 years, I've just been trying to find different ways to educate myself. And I didn't know where I was going until maybe last year or like a year and a half ago. Kind of after I really after what Kaepernick did, I saw the work that he was doing, that I think that this is something that I'm interested in. I was really just seeking knowledge, as I said, and I didn't know where it was going. But America, as you know, Wayne, is a very different place. So there was a time of transition for me where I learned a lot. And being down here and being with some amazing people, especially here in the Batten School, it's kind of helped me kind of see who I am and see kind of where I want to go with my work.
Thank you. I think you're going to be my #1 resource going forward now.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Dean Solomon, followed by Ian Tobin.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Gerry. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And Terrell, great to see you. Appreciate your work. And I think it's really quite inspiring to the power of the platform that you talk of for athletes to bring attention to issues they care about. And it's been inspiring to me to watch many people this year, including some of UVA's own, Jocelyn and Charles and Chris Long and you. How do we protect athletes, though? Right? Because I look at Kaepernick, and I think he's a great role model for my sons. But I think Kaepernick was then used and exploited by certain politicians to stow division in this country. And his standing up for human rights and the rights of people in police interactions was then, I think, turned and made political. And is that just an occupational hazard of athletes who want to be activists? Or is there some way to try to protect athletes in this space?
That is a great question. And I do think it's part of the game. I think it's somewhat inevitable that people might try and skew what you're saying. I think the best way to try and curb that is to really be thought out with what you're doing, and to have true intentions and true understanding of what you're doing and how it may affect people in different ways. But protecting athletes, I do feel like if you're sincere and honest in what you're doing, and the criticism will come. That's something that came out in my interviews, that the people will try, and the unforgiving media will try and can maybe skew what you're saying. But if you're steadfast in who you are and your beliefs, I think that whatever comes, you'll be able to withstand. I think that was kind of seen with Kaepernick, even though him in the NFL is a little shaky. I think who he is as a person, he stays steadfast in what he believed in. And even though he's not in the league anymore, the impact he had has rippled even to his conversation right now, even to the people like Malcolm Jenkins and Anquan Bolton in the league. So yeah, it's a tough question. I don't think there's any way to keep people completely protected, but there are ways we can support them. There are ways we can make sure that their message isn't undermined by some, nefarious actor or something like that. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Terrell. Honestly, this has been really informative for me. So I really appreciate you doing this. My question kind of pertains to like how your process kind of applies to sports that are less diverse. Like I know that's kind of a thing in like NHL and hockey, and definitely if you follow like Formula One, like that is also a problem. And I'm just wondering if it changes the process at all, or if it kind of stays the same.
Definitely. I feel like in any league, the support from your league officials and your teams can alter how your approach to kind of seeking change in some way. I do think if there is less support from organizational and infrastructure in the league structure, again, there are groups outside of the league that are doing this work. The Press Coalition is a great kind of example because they are a group that can bring in people from any league. They have, I think, 10 different leagues right now where they have ambassadors for. So that is that structure and that resource that would have been the league had the league, would have been F1 had they had that structure internally. However, since they don't, these different kind of third-party groups are providing that infrastructure and providing that resource for them. So if you're in a league or organization that's maybe less supportive of their players or athletes or drivers, whatever it may be, there is this resource which is growing. And I hope that there are more resources and more organizations kind of sprouting up to support athletes and through their activism.
Thank you.
Brandon, I think, is up next, please.
First off, I want to say thank you for the great presentation and your insights. My question is, in the NCAA at the moment, I hear there being a lot of slippery slope around athlete pay and athlete pay affecting the integrity of college sports. Having played collegiately and working in activism, do you see these as legitimate claims? And ultimately, what is your take on athlete pay?
Yeah, difficult question. I do think it's pretty complex. I'm not too sure, on with how if colleges should pay athletes. I do believe the NIL conversation is happening is pretty important. And that's something that I think I want to dive into a little bit more. I've been pretty bogged down by this presentation right here, but I do believe NIL should be an aspect that the NCAA should look into. I'm glad to see that legislators and Congress looking into it as well. Because however, with that, there are a ton of implications and a ton of questions that have to be answered. So I'm gonna look into that a little bit more and hopefully maybe get back to you. Thanks for the question, though.
Thanks, Brandon, and thanks, Terrell, for your response. There's a question Natalie Abby put in chat, and I don't think that Natalie is still here, but I'd like to raise that question. In your research developing your model, did you come across any analogous groups that are useful in learning from, considering to better understand how athletes can be activists? Of course, athletics is more than a profession, so this is a different conversation than dentists as activists, for example. But are there any other groups with similarities to athletes that you learn from, we can learn from, in terms of leveraging resources to be an activist?
Yeah, that is a fascinating question. And I think that the thing that makes athletes special is one, they have a season. So they have a whole off season where they can focus on things outside of their sport, where I would seldom professions where you have, half the year off. However, man, so when it comes to activism, yeah, athletes have that special, that seasonal kind of aspect, but they also have the platforms that other people just don't have. So it's hard to find other professions that I could think of off the top of my head that may compare in the same way. So in that case, I haven't seen any that much, but again, the scope of this paper for me was about athletes. So I was kind of focused on that.
Terrell, I might add to that you could draw some parallels with entertainers where they've had movie stars, filmmakers, people in the music business, but you have a unique platform in that you're part of a university as well. And one of the things that's so gratifying to us as professors is those of you who are scholar athletes on this call know how much you appreciate being a NARP, not athlete, regular person, and not getting treated all the time with some kind of special air flutter because you're performing in the sports arena and frankly being denigrated for your skills in the classroom. So it's super gratifying to us to see someone build a bridge across that. And we've seen the trouble that entertainers have had with that when they don't do their homework and they just do a drop in or a flyby. And so your building blocks, I think, are so important for people. I actually do think it might be a model for those in the entertainment industry. But you guys are just in a unique position as young men and women looked up to as leaders. Hey, Brian, I don't know about you, but I think we're probably getting close to the time to wrap here. We've all got to go to 1 o'clock, some of us. But with your permission, I was going to try to draw this part of our discussion to a close, to invite you guys to reach out to Terrell individually or to Professor Williams or me if you have more questions about the content of this program. We're just super grateful to you, Terrell. We always say it's an honor to teach you men and women because you're going off to make change in the world long after we'll be able to do it. But this is a particularly gratifying session for this professor because I've learned so much from you, from your colleagues, and from Professor Williams through engagement in this process. We've got a lot of support from athletics and academics to make sure we dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. And you far exceeded expectations for this professor. So I just want to personally congratulate you and thank Brian Williams for collaborating with me. Brian, I'm going to give you last word, friend.
Okay, last word. There was a great question Austin posted in chat, and we won't get a chance to get to it, but this is something I'd like for us to kind of think about, that question, but also just a closing kind of comments, something that we have to all grapple with. William Faulkner once said that the past is never dead, it's not even past. And this is something I'd like for you guys to think about. When we think about the issues that we have faced, are facing, and realistically will continue to face within our society, how do we best ensure that movements like this, that Terrell has researched, won't end up dying out and becoming a monument? So how do we best ensure that movements like this won't end up dying out and becoming a monument? That's the challenge and charge I'd like for each of us to kind of think about as we move forward. Terrell, you've really inspired me to kind of think deeply about these issues, and I commend you for the hard work that you've done. And I'm so grateful for each of you for zooming in and participating with it in the questions that were asked. Each of you stay safe, be well, and all the best. And thanks so much to our technical support for allowing this to happen. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Y'all have a good one. Thank you very much.
Thanks all. Thanks, Millie.